Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 10 of the Gospel of Matthew. We've been talking about that section in chapter 10 which deals with the instructions of Jesus to the apostles. It's kind of like Jesus is getting the apostles ready for their ministry. They're facing some challenging circumstances. They've been following Jesus for a while. They've been seeing what he's doing. Now they're ready to kind of go out on their own, but they need some help from Jesus. So in verse 9, Jesus gives them a very interesting instruction. He says, "Do not take gold or silver or copper for your belts." So again, Jesus is reiterating this theme of not taking any money on your journey, but really depending on the providence of God and not getting concerned with material things. The gold, silver, or copper are mentioned by Jesus because these would have been the metals that the money was made from, and those coins were kept in the belt. So don't worry about this money. And in verse 10 he says, "No sack for the journey, or a second tunic, or sandals, or walking stick. The laborer deserves his keep." And you look at that and you say, well, no sack for the journey. I mean, this is going to be difficult. But then not a second tunic, only one tunic. No sandals. I mean, they're going to be walking. It's rocky ground, tough ground. No sandals even. I mean, that seems extreme. And no walking stick for the journey. I mean, it seems like it's going to be a difficult journey. This is not going to be easy. I'm putting myself in the place of the apostles, hearing these instructions. I'm like, what am I in for here? This is going to be really tough. And then the laborer deserves his keep. So you will be taken care of. You are a laborer. You're a laborer for God. You're a laborer for Jesus. You're a laborer for the gospel. And you do deserve your keep, and you will get your keep. How? Jesus doesn't say how. And again, as human beings, we like to know the how. Well, okay, I'm going to go on this journey. I'm going to be sharing the gospel, the good news. Well, how am I going to have food, lodging? How is my reception going to be from this message? There's a lot of unanswered questions. So Jesus is giving the instructions, but it's not in the sense of that clear that everything is going to be simple and everything is going to be answered. The walking stick, you might say, well, what about the walking stick? Well, they probably were younger and in fairly good shape. Why would they need a walking stick? The walking stick was used to ward off wild animals. So not even a walking stick. And you might say, well, what if I do encounter a wild animal? How am I going to deal with that? That could be challenging. But no walking stick. The sack was used to hold food for the journey. So you went on a journey, you normally would take the walking stick, you would take the sack, so you would have some food for your journey. But again, very interesting here. Those who were poor would not have a sack. So Jesus is again emphasizing the importance of recognition of the poor in your proclamation of the gospel. This is a message primarily that you will give to those who are the least among us. I mean, it's certainly a message for everyone, but your primary focus is going to be on the poor, and so bringing that sack would alienate you from the poor. They would look at the sack and say, well, I don't have a sack. I don't take food on my journey. I don't have the means to do that. So again, it brings home to us the fact that as we proclaim the gospel, not doing it in an ostentatious type of way, with excesses, so that we alienate those who are the poorest among us. Our primary focus should be on the poor, Jesus is saying, in giving those instructions. Now, of course, as we see those instructions and we hear them, we're like, oh, no sack for the journey, no big deal. We're not thinking of the implications of what Jesus is saying for the audience that Jesus has in mind. And so we have to reflect about our audience today in our outreach to the poor. Are we conscious in the way we proclaim the gospel of the importance of reaching out to those that are poor and not to alienating them by how we present the gospel, by how we dress, by any particular show or demonstration we make in terms of our appearance? All of that would be important. Interestingly, as you contrast Matthew's passage with Mark's passage, and of course Mark would have been the original, Mark does allow a staff to ward off the animals, and Mark does allow sandals. So Matthew is really giving us a stricter version, a more challenging version of the instructions of Jesus, and saying, no walking stick, no sandals, and no sack. To carry a change of clothing, a second tunic, was a luxury in the ancient world. So again, having that second tunic would again alienate one from the poor. It would put one in a higher class. To have that change of clothing that was for the wealthier people. It was a luxury. None of these material items would be needed, Jesus is saying, because the people to whom you are proclaiming the message, they will provide for your needs. As Jesus said, the laborer deserves his keep. So you are laboring. You are laboring in the sense that you are proclaiming the gospel. You're bringing the message to people. That is a work, that is a labor, and you're doing that. So you deserve your hire. You will be taken care of by the very people to whom you are going. Your message is dependent on the people, is it not? For their receptivity. Will they be open to hearing you? And if they are open to hearing you, they will value that message. They will respect that message. They will embrace that message. This is where we get into an authentic proclamation of the gospel, where you truly are sharing what the good news is all about. And when you do that, that hits a chord in people. And they respond generously. And you won't have to worry about sandals and cloaks and sacks and all of that stuff and money. You will be taken care of by those people. So that's the implication when Jesus says, the laborer deserves his keep. Now, you're an apostle, and you're hearing this message. You're hearing these instructions. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to take anything for my journey. I'm going to be dependent on the people. How is this going to happen? It's like many of us in ministry, when we try to do ministry, we're like, how is this possibly going to work? I mean, it doesn't seem good for this. We're trying to proclaim the gospel and share the message. And we're like, are people really going to, we doubt it. Are people really going to respond? Is this going to be effective? Am I going to be accepted? Or will people just reject what I have to say and turn away? And where will I be left? I won't have any sack. I won't have any walking stick. I won't have any sandals. I'll have nothing. I'll be out in the cold. No second tunic. This is going to be a disaster. You just hear these thoughts going through the mind of the apostles as Jesus is giving these instructions. We read the instructions. We hear the instructions now. And we're like, oh, it did work out for the apostles. They were eminently successful in spreading the message. And so we read them and say, oh, these are good instructions, and Jesus is laying it out pretty clearly, and this is fine. But putting ourselves back then, the apostles hearing this originally, we can just imagine what they were going through. And so for us today, it's similar. What are we going through when we hear these instructions, that this is how we are to proclaim the message and how we are to proclaim the gospel? We hear this instruction, and we're like, is this really going to work? Is it going to be effective? Do I need more elaborate production? Do I need lights and camera and action and all sorts of pyrotechnics and to proclaim the gospel? Maybe just proclaiming it as Jesus said is not going to work, is not going to be effective. And I think that's what we run up against. So what it comes down to is, do we trust the instructions that Jesus left with us?